according to reports, the next Star Wars trilogy that's going to be happening, that's launching in 2022, is going to be by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the famous, but at this point in time, perhaps the infamous showrunners behind Game of Thrones. Now, and not, the Rian Johnson trilogy, as many people were feared. Well, depending on how you felt about The Last Jedi. If you liked The Last Jedi, you would have been perfectly fine if Rian Johnson's trilogy had been the one they started with. But if you didn't like The Last Jedi, like I didn't, or at least I didn't like the Luke Skywalker treatment in The Last Jedi, you were like, man, they're going to allow Rian Johnson the opportunity to mess up more characters. However, I'll get to Rian Johnson as I think Rian Johnson might actually be a good director if he was directing a movie that didn't involve legacy characters. Maybe with some brand new characters he could start with from scratch. They wouldn't have all this previous history for him to mess up. But anyways, he's not going to be doing his trilogy, at least not first. It's going to be by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Interesting, though, in that Benioff and Weiss are not directors. They're like writers and producers and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe, this might make a lot of people unhappy, that Rian Johnson might direct a movie that they have written or produced. We'll see. We'll see what Star Wars and, Bob Iger do. The news of this came, Bob Iger was giving like a press conference and he mentioned that, David Benioff and Weiss are going to do the trilogy. This first trilogy was going to be theirs. But again, they're not directors. So it is possible, the question mark is who's going to be directing these movies that they're going to like spearhead. So I think that, it is a possibility that Rian Johnson might still be in the mix if you're a Rian Johnson hater. Now, before recently, the news of David Benioff and D.B. Weiss doing a Star Wars trilogy, people loved that news, I'm pretty sure. Most people were like, well, the show they're doing right now, Game of Thrones, it's awesome, it's spectacular, it's addicting. Them doing Star Wars, let's do it. Game of Thrones is a fantasy, Star Wars is a fantasy in space, by talented guys. It's a match made in fan heaven, right? But again, something seems to have happened with Game of Thrones in this past season, with the most recent episode, especially. And, it's so bad that, well, in a lot of people's eyes, that they're wondering, this final episode that comes on this weekend, this next Sunday, there's no way that they can, redeem all the mistakes in this previous episode and this whole season in that one episode. And I don't think they are. Cast members from like Game of Thrones have been given interviews saying, it's disappointing or whatever. Kit Harington said it's disappointing. Peter Dinklage gave his statement that looked like he was like being held hostage, saying things like, oh yeah, it's great, but he didn't seem sincere. Emilia Clarke did the same thing. She was like, best season ever in this one video. They could be trolling us. Who knows? The final episode could come on and it could be spectacular and they'll be like, yeah, we got you. But I don't think they are. Now about Benioff and Weiss, given that the first like 7, well, some people would say the first 4 or 5, depending on whom you ask, seasons of Game of Thrones were excellent, that there is hope, there is some talent there. But the only reason they were really able to execute those so much is because they were following George R.R. Martin's books that had already been written. So you can make the argument that they're good at adapting other people's material, but when they have to come up with stuff on their own, because, George R.R. Martin has not yet written the books for seasons 7 and 8. They couldn't wait for him, so they had to like do it themselves. That when they have to like execute great drama or suspense on their own, they don't know how to do it. We'll see. The verdict is out. Again, they'll only have 3, 2-hour movies. Might be easier for them to maintain that awesomeness over, like 10 years of seasons. And, there is talent there if they were able to make Game of Thrones. They were a crucial part, even though it was George R.R. Martin's books, it's the core. He's definitely a part of the main reason. They're instrumental. They brought it to life on screen. They hired talented directors to execute the vision for, the earlier seasons. So I think the talent is there. The question is, the hope is, since I'm a Star Wars fan and many other people are Star Wars fans too, I do hope that Benioff and Weiss take, they look at the criticism that they've faced this past season, especially this past episode, which will probably continue with the series finale, this weekend, Sunday. I hope they look at this criticism and this backlash, and I'm sure their actors and other people have expressed this to them behind the scenes, or they could tell all these people like doing this stuff, and it's like, this stuff is crap and I don't like doing it. If they take the lessons from this and actually learn from it, they can use the constructive criticism, the feedback to make the Star Wars trilogy that they're doing awesome and not make the same mistakes. you know, to follow through on story threads, you know, if you've built up certain characters to be a certain way, to not undo or destroy the way that character is supposed to be. In like the last 5 minutes of the movie, that makes no sense, given the last 5 minutes of the narrative, given, you know, the groundwork you've laid out over the past, you know, several previous minutes, you know, like with Daenerys and Jon Snow and many other characters on the show. You know, the stuff you set up in the beginning and the way that you say these people are psychologically, you got to follow through with that. You can't just throw it all out the window to be shocking, right? The thing about shock value and subverting expectations is it still has to follow character development, right? And it still has to make sense within the narrative. Like, you can shock people, you can subvert expectations, but, you know, the characters subverting these expectations and shocking you have to be in character. And it has to, like, fit with what has been established earlier in, you know, the narrative, right? Which is what Game of Thrones Season 8, you wouldn't think that the people writing this show understood that. Which is surprising that these are professional storytellers who helped make one of the most successful shows of all time. Or at least one of the most successful shows in recent years. So how do you feel? I mean, so I do feel that for the most part, Benioff and Weiss doing the first trilogy in the next era of Star Wars movies, that's good. Because I think they do have the talent. They're not perfect. They're not infallible. But it's not a slam dunk. And a lot of you are probably really happy that it's not the Rian Johnson trilogy. But like I said, just because, you know, he's not writing it doesn't mean he's not still directing it. Because Benioff and Weiss are not directors. They're going to have to hire people to direct these movies. So you may not have seen the last of Rian Johnson. So we'll see. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.